And we are live, everybody. Good morning. Happy Black Friday. Hopefully, everybody's prepared and ready to go for that. I'm definitely going to avoid all of that. My name is Bryan Armentrout, and I am with the Food Safety Foundation. And you have found, if you're new to this, the Food Safety Chat Live. And we do a live stream every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, which is where I'm at, 10 a.m. Eastern, where Wendelyn is at. And we go live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. And what we do on here is we talk about all things food safety. So we bring in an expert, we talk about this subject, and then we're able to ask questions and interact. So what you'll notice with this is a little bit different than your normal discussion around food safety, where you have a PowerPoint presentation and then there's questions at the end. This is set up to be interactive, and this is an amazing opportunity to really interact with experts in these fields and get questions asked and answered that you're looking for, because food safety is not a point of competition. We're all in this together, and in the eyes of the public, it doesn't really matter what type of food or product that you're making. We're all kind of being judged together on whether we're able to manage food safety correctly. So one of the things that we love to do on here is in the comment section, everybody. This is meant to be interactive, and a good way to start this is to let us know where you're at in the world. I am in Loveland, Colorado, and today is going to be a beautiful 65 degrees. Looking out my window, I don't even think I see a cloud in the sky. It's going to be a beautiful day. And today I'm very happy to have our guest, Dr. Wendelyn Jones, who's with IFINS, and we'll be kind of going over a little bit more of what we do and what she's doing at the Institute. And it's really some really cool stuff. So good morning, Wendelyn. How are you?
I'm doing well, and now I'm wondering why I'm not living in Colorado with the weather that you're getting, because it's windy, and I think we're going to get to like 45 today. But
and what area are you in?
Right, so we live outside of Washington, D.C., in a Maryland suburb of Washington, D.C.
So you're on the Maryland side, okay.
Yeah, we're on the Maryland side, not on the Virginia side. It's just how things have played out.
Very nice. Yeah, it's always interesting in life, where we end up and things like that. We lived in Pennsylvania for a while, Buffalo, New York, but I grew up in Wyoming, and we were fortunate to come back out to Colorado, over a decade ago now. So happy to be here, and it's always interesting, right? There's always somewhere that kind of becomes home, right? Where it's the home base, and kind of out here is that for us. I think part of it too is the mountains, right? So if you grow up in an area with mountains and then you move somewhere where there's no mountains, it's weird. And so especially here in the Front Range in Colorado, we always have that frame of reference of the mountains to the west. And so it doesn't matter where you're at. You can always just look at the mountains and say, oh, okay, now I know that's north. And, you never get lost. But when we lived in Pennsylvania, so we were out in Lancaster, there's nothing, right? And the world is a lot smaller because you can't see as far, and the roads don't make any sense because they were these pikes and everything else, they were all built on cow trails and all these type of things, right? And so you have these windy roads that go all these weird directions, and it's very interesting. I remember one time when we lived in Buffalo, and pretty much the assumption is that if you lived in Buffalo, you've been there your whole life. And somebody was giving me directions one time, Wendelyn, and they were saying, okay, go down this way, turn right, turn left, and then turn right where Kmart used to be. I'm like, I don't know where that is. And they just looked at me like I was weird, which was kind of funny.
Right. Nope, absolutely.
And we have my assistant, Renee, on, and Renee is an awesome guy. He actually lives in the Philippines, so nice to have him here. Victoria in Seattle, nice to see you. Lohit in Minneapolis, 20 degrees and a frowny face. That sounds a little on the cold side, and always awesome to have Corey here. Corey's a big supporter of the program, and we love what she does. So thank you, Corey, for joining us this recovery day after Turkey Day for sure. So one of the things, and we were talking a little bit about before we went live here, that I always do, Wendelyn, is I want to jump in right away to our subjects, and I forget about our simultaneous sip, right? Our beverage of choice for everyone. So please join Wendelyn and I in a drink of our ceremonial beverage. Wonderful. Mine is coffee. Are you drinking coffee too?
I am drinking some coffee here, and I've also got some water. So, it'll all be. I have a non mug ready to
There you go.
go.
You're prepared. I love it. Yeah, you're a pro. You know,
I'm
you know how
ready.
to do.
I am ready for this conversation, Bryan, because it'll be good.
Absolutely. Dev, good morning from Wichita, and very humble weather today. I like that description. That's awesome. Let's dive in here. And so one of the things that I want to bring up here, and I'm really happy about this, and one of the things, Wendelyn, in my business as a consultant, you work with different industries and collaborate and things like this. And one of the groups that I work with, who is sponsoring the food safety chat, is EAS Consulting Group, based in your area of the country. And they just have this amazing group of consultants, over 100 different consultants with different areas of expertise in the food industry and other industries as well. So medical device and dietary supplement and what have you. But just in the food space, they have over 100 consultants with an average of over 20 years of experience in those fields. And so what's cool about that is you can talk with Tim Lombardo, who runs that program, and find just that right person who can help you out. And they also do training programs as well. And what's really cool about that is they have a special Black Friday special, and you can actually get 20% off their training, which is amazing. So if you go to their site and check out their training, so EAS Consulting Group /training, you can check out their programs. And if you find something you like, if you put Black Friday in the promotion code when you're checking out, 20% off. So thank you, EAS, for doing that. Check them out if you're looking for some help. I highly recommend them. So with that, I wanted to dive in and give an introduction to Dr. Jones, because she has an amazing background. She is the executive director with the Institute for the Advancement of Food and Nutritional Sciences, IFNS, so based in DC, a collaborative organization, which I think is something really, and this is what our topic is about today, bridging this gap between, manufacturers and government, and having different groups within that can help facilitate things, which is absolutely amazing. So her career, over 20 years, and it's always amazing, isn't it, Wendelyn, how fast that time goes, right? Over 20 years, over 20 years of experience.
And it's going to stop there. I will also tell you that it's stopping. Now that I hit 20 years, it is we're
exactly. That's all I say for mine now too. It's like 20 plus years. Leave it at that. So her background is undergrad in chemical toxicology, and she's worked for companies such as Syngenta, DuPont, Corventa, AgriScience, Trade Association in DC, and now she is heading up IFNS. So welcome to our show.
Great. Thrilled to be here, Bryan.
And so as Renee said here, guys, if you have questions along the way, what we like to do with this, right, is we're having this conversation. This is meant to be interactive. So put your questions or comments in the posts, and we'll get to those and work those into our conversation. So Tammy's in lovely Austin. Welcome. And so Renee can help facilitate that as well. So also at the end, we're going to throw a link in here to a new group we put together in Locals. It's a free site. There's a subscription-based model in there for membership where you get some additional information, such as live streams like this. So Renee is going to put in the end of the live stream some information on how you can sign up for Locals for free. And so I post recall information in there and other things as they come up so that we can collaborate on these type of activities. So really, I mean, that's, I think, Wendelyn, then a good segue kind of into what we're talking about today, which is kind of this data versus information type of things, right? And when you work in the industry, we collect tons and tons and tons of information, and we have all of this data and all these things that we collect, but it really seems like we really don't do a whole lot with it, do we?
Correct. I mean, and it's something where let me start with, I'm glad that whether folks are in the government or in industry or anywhere in that food and beverage supply chain, okay, we're all collecting all of this data, and that is important because that is almost, dare I say, step one to making science-based decisions. But really, and Bryan, this is perhaps something for you and I and the audience to kind of talk about, is, are we doing enough with that data? Have we gotten to a point where, we could have and set up parameters and systems that would allow for some of that sharing of that data to really allow us to, on one hand, predict, okay, but at the other side, almost measure the impact of what we're doing on food safety training.
Very interesting. Yeah. Because I mean, part of this too, Wendelyn, is that, so for example, when I run quality assurance at companies, let's say we had a complaint against a supplier or something like that. We found a piece of foreign material in something that they were sending to one of our plants, and we issue a complaint against them. And then they come back, and it's generally very quickly, right? Within 2 or 3 days, the quality group manager responds back to my regional guy and says, "Oh yes, we've investigated and we have retrained the operator." And I would read that, and it's just like, really? That's no, right? That's not the root cause of what's going on. Or just, throwing the operator under the bus and saying, "Oh, you didn't do a good job." Well, why didn't he do a good job? What was the reason for that decision-making process? And to your point, what data was that person using to make that decision? And a lot of times we don't really understand that. It kind of gets into what we see within the standards relative to, and you kind of referenced this too, right? Is we're always doing the corrective action piece, but then how do you get to the preventive action piece? And, we kind of do now a little bit of trend analysis around pest control. And, oh, hey, guess what? In the fall, when it's getting cold and the mice don't like being out in the fields, they're coming to your plant, right? You need to prepare for those things. So to your point, I mean, how are we actually using that data that we collect? And I think we don't do a very good job of that.
Right. And I mean, it's definitely perhaps an area for improvement, right? And as IFINS is an organization that's built on bringing the private sector industry side together with the public sector, whether that public sector be government or academia. Really, if we're going to start to move that measurement and evaluation piece on that proactive arena on food safety, then we need to realize that we've got to come up with a way to bring in what the government knows, what the government sees with what's going on the industry side. And, building up things like formalized public-private partnerships. It's easy to say, actually it's kind of complicated to say because it's lots of syllables, but it's relatively easy to say, but it becomes difficult to do because you've got to start with getting that trust. And it's one of those things where I think in the food safety arena, where we've got drivers around, candidly, around FSMA, okay, not to mention new era, next era stuff. You've got that common agreement, right? And Bryan, as you even noted in your introductory remarks, both this morning as well as in all your other commentary, food safety is not competitive. Okay, this is not competitive. This is about helping everybody do better. Can we build up that trust in that space, right? To help us be able to share some of that data.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point, because I think a lot of it is we have these barriers that we've built up. And so part of what I think relative to this is, if you're working in the field of food safety and quality assurance and these type of things, you're working for a company and you're helping to protect that company and their brands and the consumers and making sure that the food is safe. But also there's an allegiance and a loyalty beyond that. Right. And so you go to an SQF conference and you meet your colleagues, and they're working in a completely different industry, and they may be a regulatory person or something like this. And you start talking with them over the lunch table and realizing that, we're all kind of doing the same thing here. Right. And the thing that I think we always need to remember, Wendelyn, is that in the eyes of the consumer, they don't care. Right. So if we have, like we have going on right now, there's a couple of big issues that FDA has been working on with the onions, for example. And this whole thing's been popping up with mushrooms, holy moly. And I can't name any of the companies involved in the onion recall. I know that they came from Mexico, and that's it, right? So in my mind as a consumer, it's like, okay, onions bad. There's something going on with the onions. I'm gonna avoid that, right? And I'm an industry person. Now imagine, a family and with young children and things like that. in the minds of the person buying the food for the family, it's just like, okay, I'm not taking any risks associated with that. And I, as a quality manager, could have the best food safety program in the world, but I'm still lumped in with the players that don't.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I think gives at least me personally hope, along with others such as yourself and others who are listening in today, that we can really start to move the needle here, right? We've got this common goal, okay, around food safety. We've got this growing recognition, and we're just go with what's in the news between mushrooms and onions, where regardless of what company is getting hit, okay, it's actually going to cause a broader market deselection to that entire classification. Okay, right? We've just had so many. Obviously, onions and mushrooms are top of mind, but there's been some others that have been in the news very, very recently, right? And you've got them, and I always said people are just doing a market deselection. Okay, so then that's going on, but is there a way where we've got this identified common goal to start to bring together the different sectors, recognizing that each one of the sectors, whether it is a produce guy, whether it's an ingredient guy, whether it's a some kind of processed food viewpoint, everybody's going to have their own, I'm going to say, be looking at a public-private partnership for their own reasons. Okay, everybody's going to have certain unique drivers to it, but there's that bigger commonality to it. And if we realize how much is going on, and this audience knows it very well, how much is going on to improve food safety, and we can start to really look at what works well, what doesn't work well, right? Almost getting to beyond that root cause analysis, then can we really start to lift everybody up? So
Exactly. And this is one of the things that I've been very lucky with in the consulting world is prior to that, when I was working in private industry, right, running quality at a company. So I had a large team with lots of resources and lots of activities inside the company, right? And it couldn't leave there. And, I would use this example, right? If someone who worked in the dairy industry had a problem, they just can't call me and say, hey, Bryan, I'm so-and-so working at this company. I've been working on my environmental monitoring program and I wanted to improve it. What, do you have some ideas? I'd be like, excuse me, who are you? Right? There's these barriers that are built up. And when you work outside of industry, then you're able to kind of step back. And I think this is where organizations such as yours come into play as well, is you're able to kind of start looking and seeing these barriers and these different silos that we've set up. And as you start talking with, and my main background is dairy and beverage and things like that. But as you start talking with the meat guys and the produce guys and these different industries, holy moly, these guys know a ton about. So, I mean, the guys who work in the meat industry, they've had tremendous issues that they've had to work through, and they've learned a lot from that. But we don't share information, right? And the example I use on this, even with my experience in the dairy field, if I was to try and get a job in produce, they'd be like, no, you don't have the relevant experience. But at that base, we're all doing the same thing. Yeah, there's going to be some differences in the details, but it's all the same, right? And I think FDA recognizes this as well too. And a big piece of this is in the enhanced traceability, right? So FDA's come out with this guidance and said, okay, here's these things. We're going to start looking at this. Here is kind of, and I look at this, Wendelyn, as a meta-analysis. FDA really looked at the food industry in the US and said, what are the riskiest things that we have, right? So, okay, we need to be concerned about soft cheeses. We need to be concerned about ready-to-eat produce, et cetera, and saying, okay, as a regulatory body, we're going to pay really, really close attention to these type of things. Oh, and by the way, the traceability going backwards through the system stinks. Right? We are going to be requiring you to come up with a better way to do this so we can go directly to the source, because getting wrapped up with the distributors and the warehouses and the aggregators and all this type of thing they don't provide anything from a food safety standpoint. We need to get right back to the source, right? And that's, I think, a good look at how these things are evolving over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does, Brian. And one of the things that if we want to talk about, I'll say actionabilizing, right? How do
Mm,
we start to bring this forward, right? And part of that, of course, is bringing in the dairy with the meat, with the produce, etc. I would posit, dare I say, my hypothesis is that we need to make sure that as these discussions are getting going, we really ensure that we bring the legal team in. I'm not a lawyer.
mm.
I would take that out of the gate, right? You're not a lawyer, but might have some lawyers online. But we have to bring in those viewpoints very early on, because if we can build the system starting first with the legal component, then it becomes a lot easier to then drive into, okay, what are the data types that would need to be shared if we wanted to look at um, effectiveness of this training at the source, right? Or, gee, is there an impact on this processing step here? If we can get the lawyers to agree, then from there we can build out to what are the data types, so to speak, in that, right? And then, you need to have a third party, okay, that's probably involved, that all parties, then the government side, the industry side, the academics who are also doing work, feel safe sharing their data, even if it is, anonymous type data. There's still going to be interest in making sure that it gets shared. But that's how I think we can start to really bring forward a data-driven change and a data-driven improvement across food safety, regardless of which area of the food and beverage arena that you're in.
Yeah, and that makes sense because let's take an example of that. So environmental monitoring, right? We're all in plants. We're all in the same similar type of environment. We're all doing environmental monitoring in most cases. And we're looking at and putting together our plans, and then something happens and we have a hit and things like this. And we say, oh, geez, all right, let's do a vector analysis. Maybe it's the forklift wheels. Maybe it's people tromping stuff in here. Maybe we have some biofilm in this area or things like this. And then that information stays right there, right? Now imagine this massive database of environmental testing across the country of anonymized data within a central repository that people can say, oh, what are some of the trends associated with environmental monitoring relative to Listeria and Salmonella and Enterobacter and these type of things? What type of correlations are there relative to this? And being able to step back and look at this at a higher level. And to your point, which I think is a great one, is the legal side of things, right? Because yeah, we're not lawyers, but we're sure damn close to it because we deal, I mean, if you're in a leadership position in quality, you're dealing with the legal team a lot. And
Yep.
it's very similar missions in that they're there to protect the company, they're there to protect the brands, and making sure that public health is being met appropriately. And having then that legal expertise, especially in food, and this is something I always recommend to my clients, is your in-house counsel may not be the right person. They may be focused on a different specialty in law, mergers and acquisitions or contract law or things like this, and they don't know anything about food law. Food law itself is very, very specific, and you need to understand it really, really well. And so if you don't have that in-house expertise, that's fine. Find a good food counsel who can help you through these things. And getting them on your side and saying, yeah, this is a great way to approach this is going to be a very good way to move this forward within your company.
Absolutely. Completely agree. I mean, it's a case where, and I like what you said there, Brian, with obviously quality managers, right? Legal team, R&D teams, etc. They're all there on one hand to protect the company, right? Okay, so R&D teams are out there to come up with future options for the company, right? Quality managers are there to protect and ensure consumer expectations are met. Legal's there also as well to protect it. But I would, and you noted this, I would just re-emphasize that regardless of where anybody sits within that food manufacturing, food ingredient space, on some level, each one of them cares about making sure that their product is safe, right? Okay, we all started out with various jobs, whether it be, being a lifeguard, whether it be working concessions at a local fair. At the end of the day, we all know that we can take pride in what we do, and people do want to take pride in what they do. And therefore, a good bit of what that personal driver is, lawyer, scientist, engineer, microbiologist, is around having pride in that work. So fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a big piece of that is, and this is something, and this ties into food safety culture too, which is be careful what you measure. Because if you tell the procurement team, here's how you're going to be judged. How cheaply do you buy stuff? Right? That's what you're going to get, right? You're going to get cheap raw materials with questionable programs and these type of things, right? And the procurement team thinks they're doing the right thing, right? At the end of the year, they get a good evaluation and they get their bonus and all these type of things, but they're causing all these other issues within the company. Or if R&D doesn't understand that if they introduce a new allergen with their new formulation, oh my God, right? One of the things I would coach these groups on as you're working on design control in this whole process is anytime you add a complexity to the system, it's not additive, it's multiplicative, right? You are increasing the complexity exponentially within the operations, which means the chance for failure goes up shoo, like this. So we have to be really, really sure of what we're doing before we do it, because once it's there, and we have to deal with it. In the dairy industry, right? So for example, on that side, one of the things with all these alternate beverages now, right? So soy milk and oat milk and all these type of things. Well, it's the same equipment in the dairy plants that runs those things. And dairy plants were originally designed for flexibility, because you want to be able to produce the 2% or the skim or all these different type of products on different lines. And there's these gigantic valve clusters meant to move these raw materials and these different components all over the dairy plant so they can do whatever they need to do. Well, now that you introduce an allergen beyond dairy, all of those valve clusters and all those different systems within those plants becomes a huge liability, because all you got to do is hit the wrong button on the wrong panel and you've got a recall. And the organization needs to understand that. And a lot of times they don't. So it's important to have that messaging out there. Let's see. So Dev, good morning. Has a question here. How reasonable to get the information from data that face mask replaces the beard net? Oh, this is practical concern for non-food safety knowledgeable employees. Certain similar GMPs are compromised during pandemic to maintain food supply chain and make it smooth. Wow, that transitions perfectly into what we were talking about getting ready for this call, Wendelyn.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, it's a really good question, right? I think it's one of those things where, and I cannot speak to who might have access to some of that data, etc. Dev. Bryan, you might be able to, or perhaps others could as well. But that's exactly the type of stuff that we need to really encourage all of our organizations, wherever it is that we work, or even as a consultant, okay, to go out and say, you know what, no, guys, there's ways to get information shared. There's ways, especially now, to get those databases set up, to find those third-party trusted partners that can facilitate sharing some of that information, because it's a really, really good point.
Yeah, because I mean, so COVID hit, and what I saw in my business is a lot of people in industry that I speak with, I would be like, hey, I'd ask them questions or talk about subjects, and some of the responses back that I got back were, Bryan, you're absolutely right, but right now, COVID, I'm spending my life in the plant trying to make sure my team is safe, because we have to keep making food and we have to keep working through this. And we had high visibility issues that happened. So here in Colorado, right, the large meat companies here in Colorado had internal outbreaks in their plants, and people died, right? And these poor teams are trying to deal with this. One of the descriptions I heard one time of being an entrepreneur is you have a bunch of parts to build an airplane, and you jump off a cliff and then you have to build the airplane on the way down and hope you get it done before you splat. In a lot of ways, that's what these food safety teams were doing, right? Is they had the expertise, and the organization came and said, "Oh my God, this whole new dynamic has hit, and we need to figure this out." And guess what? You need to figure it out. And everybody was operating in their own bubble. I think this is a perfect example, then, Wendelyn, of how this joint venture between industry, associations such as yours, regulatory, can work together to say, okay, everything is been blown up. How do we protect our public? How do we protect our employees? Is COVID a threat on food? Right in the beginning, nobody even knew, right? Oh my God, are we transferring things to food? And then we started getting data back on that. But I think Deb brings up a perfect example of if we had a robust system in place for sharing information, man, that would have made all of our lives a lot easier.
Right. Absolutely. And I will note just real quick here, Bryan, it looks like Raphael came back and has partly started to answer Dev's comment around requiring folks to wear both. So, because that's a really brilliant point. So thank you.
Maybe people wear both. Yeah, absolutely. And hi from India, Dalit. Nice to see you here. Yeah, so I mean, these type of things, a lot of times we're in a bubble, and I know from personal experience, it can be a very lonely place to be. Right? You have a problem, and you're not quite sure where to go, and setting up those programs is really, really important. I remember relatively early in the FSMA implementation process, Wendelyn, when FDA, do you remember when they were going around doing these listening groups?
Yes.
And early on in the process, it was very, very scripted, right? FDA had their slide deck, and you could tell, this gets back to our comments relative to legal, right? They had what they were allowed to say. They would read the slides, and then people would ask questions at the end. And essentially the response back was, okay, well, thank you very much for your comment. Beyond what I've said, we'll get back to you, right? It was essentially the response back. And people were like, oh, okay, well, that doesn't really help me. And then the FDA started kind of, once they got a little more comfortable with us, they began to kind of, open up a little bit more. And even recognitions, there was a meeting I went to with a relatively high ranking FDA official on the board. And he had said, hey, listen, guys, we're learning just like you. And the investigators are figuring this out too. And so if things start going off the reservation, I need to know, right? So if somebody's coming in there really heavy-handed and not following the rules, call me and let me know. And I was like, whoa. And he was good to his word on that. So I was very, very impressed by that. Also in these listening groups, FDA started floating out there, and this really didn't go anywhere because I think the reaction was too strong from industry, which is too bad because it really kind of folds into what we're talking about. Is FDA kind of floated the idea out there of, well, what if we had some type of a system or a database where we had by category, so dairy, produce, what have you, food safety plans. And everybody went, whoa, right? You want my food safety plan, right? Well, guess what? They have access to it anyway. And what people are figuring out and what FDA is learning, right? Because essentially the curtain's been pulled back and FDA has access through FSMA to a lot of stuff they couldn't see before. That food safety plans are pretty similar by industry, right? So if you're a dairy guy, your food safety plan is going to look pretty close to what the other dairy guys look like, depending on category. So, right, ready to eat, soft ripened cheeses, et cetera. And there's subcategories, of course, but the basics are going to be there. And if we can share that information, man, that really accelerates the process of building a robust food safety plan.
Absolutely. And Bryan, this is where I'll start kind of pivoting to like a different dimension that then can follow out, which is, okay, these are the plans, and then somebody's going to go appropriately, what do we actually know about that? Okay. Like, is there a science gap? Is this where research would be beneficial to kind of confirm? Because we've just always sat there and said, if we do this, then we know Listeria's dropped this way. If we do this, we know Salmonella's dropped this way.
Mhm.
So that's where, I would say organizations, and yes, this is core to what IFINS does as an organization, is identify those research gaps that exist. Okay. And
Mhm.
then we go out and we fund independent researchers to do that work, often through a competitive RFP process for academics to go do it. So we're not tied to just um, one professor or one school to go do that work. But then
Mhm.
that lets all of us sit there and go, hey, wait a second. We thought, and we did do some work relatively recently on listeria and salmonella and low moisture foods.
Ah,
We sit there and go, why would you think that? It was some interesting finding, right? Which can then sit there and go, wait a second. If that's the case, then if I'm a CDC guy, right, or elsewhere in the government, wait a second, I'm seeing an outbreak. Am I asking all the right questions? Okay.
mhm.
And that's where, if we can move, as we were talking about getting the data, getting to the point of even sharing and allowing and promoting the sharing of those plans within individual plants, then wait a second, we can identify, wait, we just do this because, dare I say, we think this is what works, but let's go do some of the science now on top of it. I'm not criticizing that anything's not been done, but if you think about it, with the acceleration that continues in the food and beverage system, right? We've got novel ingredients coming in, okay, right? It used to, I mean, the idea of alternative milk only entered in to everybody's vocabulary, what, 3, 4 years ago, right?
Yeah.
um, you know, it's everything's just changing. So it's something where I would posit as a scientist, you know what? Let's go do an experiment. Let's go test it. Let's go find out.
Yeah. A perfect example for me in the dairy industry, right? You always go back to it,
Yeah, please. Yep.
is going way back to HACCP and everything else. And then with food safety plans, uh, one of the chemical hazards that was always in there was in the raw milk was antibiotics, right? It was just always there. And it's like, oh no, you have to have antibiotics in there as a risk. And after a while, people started looking at it and say, well, why? Right? We're testing at receipt and
Right.
it never even makes it in the plant. So isn't that a prerequisite program? That's not a CCP. And then data started coming in on the prevalence of antibiotic contamination in milk and the threat to human health associated with that, right? And the data started showing, this isn't really a big deal. And a lot of people were like, oh my, their heads would explode. And it started slowly evolving that way. And I think this is where an outside agency such as yours, right, can help facilitate
Yeah.
that and work with these different companies to say, okay, well, let's look at this. Let's look at antibiotics, because part of this too, then, Wendelyn, is we're all human beings and we only have so much time and so much focus we can bring to things. So if we're focusing on the wrong thing, we're not focusing on the right thing. And we're wasting
Absolutely.
time. We're wasting time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more, right? It goes to what you just said about, if your procurement guy is focused on, has the only thing is cost, right? Then you're going to get that. So it's about measuring what matters. Okay.
Yep.
You know, so very good. So Brian, one of the things I wanted to bring up, if there is a little bit of time here, and this is
Yes.
because I've had the opportunity to dial in and listen in as a audience member on these chats, is around, and this I would say, shifting to advice for earlier career, maybe even
Mm.
mid-career folks who work in food safety, right? And candidly, probably everywhere else too. And that is, don't surprise your boss. Okay. I'm just gonna cut this right
100%.
there. Okay.
And that merits repeating. Never, ever, ever, ever surprise your boss, right? That's a perfect way to kill your career.
Because it's something where if you're in a plant, you might start to see a trend line going up. Okay. And maybe it's not at the point of quote action. Let your boss know that you're starting to see it, is step one. Okay. And then step two, and some of this gets along with where you are career wise. You're going to go to your boss. You're going to say, hey, situational awareness, I'm seeing this, but then tell them what you're going to do. Come up with a proposed kind of a proposed response, like, i.e., we're starting to see it. I'll follow up with you in a week, if not sooner, if it continues to go up more, or this will be the threshold for which I'm definitely going to send something official. What have you? You've got to never surprise your boss, because your boss may or may not have had your exact role before, but they understand that things are happening. Okay. So give them a heads up on it. But Bryan, looks like you wanted to add something on that.
Oh, no, I'm just thinking to myself exactly. So, I mean, some of the points in my career relative to that. So one of the things, Wendelyn, that I always taught my team was that a lot of companies put out like a monthly quality report. Okay, here is the result of our consumer complaints. Here's the complaint rate per million pounds. Here's a summary of our environmental monitoring, right, which kind of filters up through the organization. And I would then sit down with senior leadership and kind of walk them through that. When I got that report, and what people always forget on those reports is that's old news, right? That's what happened over the last month, right? The only point of that is to keep people up to date on what's going on. And everything in there then should already have solutions associated with that, right? So then if the CEO says, oh, I see that we had some environmental hits in our plant in Wisconsin. Yes, we did. Here's what we did, and right? That's always backwards looking. And that's important to have that context. But the important thing is the forward looking piece, which is what you're talking about, right? So as a good quality manager, and getting into this don't surprise your boss thing, is having that data, kind of like the example I gave early on with the pest control. If you know that the mice are going to be active in the fall, and your plant is located next to this nice, big, beautiful cornfield that just got harvested, guess what's going to happen, right? You become extremely valuable within the organization to that management team if you're able to make that transition from looking at things that happened in the past to predicting things that are going to happen in the future, and saying, hey guys, guess what? We need to up our pest control activity. We need to put in some new traps. We need to double our investigations and our inspections from every other week to once a week, because we need to be ready for this, right? Don't surprise your boss, right?
Right. And the other side of it, right, is we can continue just with that example on pest control and mice coming in. You're going to say it, right, and by letting your boss know, okay, right, your boss then may be in a position to sit there and go, wait a second, that means I don't need to go order 20 traps, right? We need to go in and place a huge order, okay? It creates a cascading effect that then allows, candidly, better food safety, okay, right? Protective of public health, right? And that's something that I know, at least when I was younger, I would often struggle with, okay, well, there's this, but what are they going to do? Because I can go order this trap myself, so to speak, right? I got it. I know how to do that, right? Now, let your boss know, because they might see different things coming across a different landscape than you have visibility to, right? So trust it, trust that it's going to work, okay? But share it, right? Don't surprise your boss, because your boss is going to be able to take that, and then just really make sure that your observation has the greatest impact. Okay, right. And I would posit that goes even if you're talking as an inspector, right, or other government role that could be having, right? You could be sitting there going, wait a second, we're starting to see this. Right. And I'm not even talking the early food safety pure stuff, right? But we're starting to see this coming out, right? Share it. Don't surprise your boss.
Exactly. And so part of this too, right, is that So FDA is doing this, and we need a way to share this information. So one of the things that FDA does, right, is if you're in charge of a region, you're a director with an FDA, and you have your field team and things like this, it's all resource allocation. So they're looking at this data and saying, okay, where do I need to be the most worried? Am I worried about the ready-to-eat sandwich maker? Am I worried about the guy mining some salt? I think I'm going to the sandwich maker, right? And FDA then only has so many resources and so much time they can use to send agents and investigators out into the field. And they reserve some of that and say, okay, well, if a big issue, well, I don't know, onions or mushrooms comes up, I have enough team resources left where I can go tackle that. And they're looking at that data to make those decisions. And they're looking at those trends. And we need to do the same thing. And gathering this information, because I think the other good example, right? The pest control is a good one, environmental monitoring, right? We're all gathering this environmental monitoring data. Being able to aggregate that, I think, is super valuable. And one of the things, Wendelyn, on here that I talk about a lot is the new inspection operations manual from FDA for 2021, where they completely modified their environmental monitoring program. When they go into a plant, of what they're focusing on, right? They're focusing on food contact surfaces. They're focusing on secondary surfaces like buttons and things like this. They are not focusing on drains and floors and walls, right? They're like, who cares? We only care about where the food is. That means we should be caring about that too, right? FDA is looking at this data, and that is a huge shift change. And that's something that I constantly talk with my customers about, because in the food industry forever and ever, just like the antibiotic testing in the dairy industry, it was like, okay, we'll test zone 3 and 4, but when it comes to zone 1 and 2, we're never going to look at that because we don't want to know, right? And this gets back to your point earlier about very important to then work with the legal team and understand the ramifications of these type of activities and holding a product and these type of things. You have to know. You have to know. And this information then can be looked at that meta level. And I think this is where organizations such as yours become extremely valuable. Where if I'm a quality manager, I can now look at this environmental data that's been anonymized and part of this giant database, and I can use that to plan my sampling.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, in fact, there's probably, if we want to look at areas that are worthy of, I'm going to say, some R&D dollars going into it. And I will admit, IFINS, we've got, I think, the second project going on in this area, but there's more to be done. Okay. And I don't know that we're going to do it all. Nor should we be the ones that do it all, is in that sampling component, right? We've got a project going on right now. It's a second one, follow-up, that sits there and says, wait a second, you're talking so often, we're talking, and this is it's a good problem to have, where we're trying to find that grain of salt, okay? We were trying to find that contaminant, right? So how is the best way to do this sampling to be able to find it? Okay. Yeah. Right. And we're asking that question. In that case, we're working with a researcher at a university on it. Okay. We're going to publish it. It's going to be publicly available. The modeling system will make it public too, right? To be able to help everybody do it. But that's the exact same, that's the exact thing. Thank you, Bryan. Great.
Yeah. And well, I mean, part of it too, right, is when you work in the food industry in quality, one of the things you figure out pretty quickly is that most machines are manufactured for speed and efficiency. They're not manufactured for cleaning. And you start looking in these machines and saying, oh my, wow, you've got metal on metal. And so in the dairy industry, right, we have the advantage of the PMO, the pasteurized milk ordinance, and a lot of the design standards around 3A. And getting that information on figuring out how to actually clean equipment and what type of things to worry about. And again, looking at zone 1 and zone 2, right? That is exceptionally valuable. Yep.
You've got, it just becomes so key, because, you can argue, and this is something that I was actually talking with my family a bit about even yesterday, given that it was Thanksgiving, the biggest food-focused holiday of the U.S. year, around, food safety is not competitive. It's everybody's business, right? But if it's food isn't safe, then it's not food. Okay, right?
Yeah.
We can even take it beyond just the importance of food safety culture, the importance that everybody needs to own it, to realizing that if it's not met, then basically you're not meeting that standard, right? It just point blank fails. So
Yep. When you step into that legal side of things, right, it comes back to, I mean, when you read warning letters from FDA, right, it's misbranding and adulteration. And
yep,
if you fail on those, you're done. You're done.
right. You're
So
absolutely on.
Tammy's got some great comments here.
Okay.
Transparency is top quality, absolutely. And with a proper feedback system, you will never be surprised and you can see the trends. Yes. Sometimes though, when you're working on this on your own and you're sitting at your desk, it's hard, right, to figure this out on your own, which is where the collaboration comes in. This quality system comes from the top. Companies need to be ready for the new era of food and work data. This includes manufacturing and processing. Strategic alliance and integration is key. Quality peeps, be ready. Absolutely. And that's been our whole topic for our conversation today. I mean, really. So let's kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot, Wendelyn. So as we're talking about this discussion today, what are some of the key things that come to mind for you?
I would say, and I really like actually where Tammy went with it, is it's about making sure that you've got the strategic alliances, right? And that starts with breaking down some of the silos that we know exist. It's about making sure that you're getting out there, having the right conversations, okay? Maybe you need to sit there and not being afraid to sit there and ask, wait, we've always done it, whether it was the antibiotics and dairy example or otherwise. Wait, we've always done it this way. Go ahead and do some of the science, because it may actually help you then make sure that those metrics that are being put in place are actually measuring the right things.
Right. Yep, absolutely. And so one of the key things that is interesting with food safety and these type of things that we do, and it's a curse that we have to bear, is that if we do a good job at it, nobody notices, right?
Correct.
Because
Yep.
people just assume that these things happen, and that is far from the case. And putting together a robust quality system with good metrics and good reporting is how you let the organization know that this is happening. Because if you don't tell them, they don't know, right? So part of being a successful quality manager is, and I always harp on this too, Wendelyn, is there's the technical skill set that we have to develop, but there's also the people side, right? We're all people, and we need to understand how to communicate this information and how to advocate and do these type of things. And this is the day after Thanksgiving. And I just wanted to take a little note here, right? And say to everybody, thank you for being here. And food safety doesn't rest, right? It doesn't matter, right, that it's the day after Thanksgiving, right? We all eat food. We all get together and use it as a source of celebration. And all these things happen because of the hard work and dedication of people like this on the call. So thank you for taking time off during what is probably your holiday to listen to food safety and talk with us about this, because we're all in this together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bryan. Could not agree more. It doesn't take a holiday. It's always there. So
Absolutely. So fantastic conversation, Wendelyn. I really enjoyed this, and I appreciate you taking time out of your holiday as well. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So again, and so in the chat here, Renee had put the link earlier in the comments for locals. So please join us on locals, and you get automatic emails. As I go through and look at information that's interesting to me, I will then forward that to everybody so that you're getting access to that right away. So please sign up for that. Nancy had a comment here as well. So let's see, the data is no better than the question asked. Well put. I like that. And how do we overcome the defensive? Yes, absolutely. Right. And so I think this kind of gets back to Wendelyn's point too, of making sure that your legal team understands what you're doing, because you're on the same side, right? Because part of legal's job, right, is to have those boundaries within an organization for all these things that they help control. And they have to understand the purposes of why you're doing this and how it provides benefit. They need to be a ally on your side, because if legal's not on your side, you're not going anywhere.
Correct.
Thank you, Renee, for posting the locals link. So yeah, awesome conversation. And as I said, Wendelyn, so we're at the 55-minute mark. Or it's amazing how quickly time flies during these conversations. So everybody, thank you again for joining us. So of course, the food safety chat takes place every Friday. And again, thank you to my sponsor, EAS Consulting Group. Please go check them out. And we will see you back here next Friday, December 3rd. Oh, wow, December. At the same time, so 10 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Mountain on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And we'll take on another food safety topic. So thank you again, everybody. And thank you, Trevor, for the comments. I'm present with you for the long haul. Thank you. Yes, it's definitely a long haul activity. We're all in this for the long game, for sure. So everybody, enjoy the rest of your Thanksgiving week, and we will see you back here Friday. And thank you, Wendelyn, for joining us.
Absolutely. Happy Friday, everyone. Take care.
Have a good time, everyone.
Bye-bye.